Good morning, everybody. My name is Andy. So I'm here to talk about empowering teams with business-led data platforms. I'm going to start by talking about a customer of ours. This is a hospitality organisation. They run through their partner network over 80,000 serviced apartments. They own and operate 160 of their own, and then they've got 14 hotels. So they're a kind of mid-size operator in that hospitality sector. In fact, I was a customer of theirs long before they were a customer of mine. In the days before Teams, in the days before COVID, working on site with customers was the norm for consultants. So 20 years ago, I was working on a project over in Bristol and making use of their serviced apartments there to have a kind of home away from home. Now, the CIO of this company was sat in this very room a year ago and came and spoke to us afterwards and said, I've got a bit of a problem. We've got Power BI in our organisation. We use it for all this reporting and analysis, and yet we're hearing some grumbles from our business users, and I'd like your help to understand really what could we do to overcome some of these hurdles. Now, when we help organisations with some of these kind of assessments, we like to use this framework. And in this case, we brought it to him and said, okay, I think what we need to look at here is the people in your organisation. What are their capabilities? What are their skills? Who do you have able to deliver on these kind of reporting and analytical needs? And what processes are they following? What best practices are available to them? How are they supported in the ways of working? What tooling is available? You've told me about Power BI. What else is available to them? What's the technology stack that they're working with? And of course, underpinning it all, what data is available to them? Have you got all of the data you need available to your end users? So we took this and we designed an engagement that started out by interviewing and running workshops with various business functions to hear from them. Where are they struggling at the moment to get value from this platform? And we digested and summarised what we heard into these 5 key themes. So firstly, we were hearing that the central kind of data team was very small and was bandwidth constrained. And as a result of that, it was far too slow to deliver any new requirements and changes to the systems. There were limitations in data access, data integration, data governance. There was no one version of the truth. There was the business users didn't feel that they had the ability to connect to some of the BI repositories. Some of them had read-only access where they wanted to go and customize and build their own Power BI reports, etc. They had users working outside of the system. A very familiar story. I'm sure you're all familiar with the users that much prefer to be in Excel than in one of the solutions that gets delivered to them. In this case, they had finance users using a planning analytics tool that naturally surfaced data through Excel, and then they were trying to pull data from Power BI and bring that in and alongside the IBM data. They had marketing teams using Google Looker on top of Google Analytics data, for example. These things just weren't integrated enough, and they were working in a variety of tools, most often Excel. The analytics and the reporting that was available to them, they felt there was too limited, and in particular too backwards looking. There was a lot of reporting of what's happened and not enough scenario modelling, forward looking, or indeed any kind of advanced AI insights being generated from the system. And finally, Power BI itself didn't have all of the data in their organisation. Not all of their source systems was being pulled in. Not all of the history in those source systems was available to them through the Power BI interface. Refreshes of the Power BI models was taking too long for them because there was no incremental loads, etc. It was whenever they had an issue. And also there was a lack of notifications. So if an overnight load failed, the business often weren't made aware of that until maybe halfway through the next day. So if you're in the room today, it's unlikely you haven't come across Power BI before, but just a quick recap. It is Microsoft's data visualization tool. It's available on desktop, through the web, on smart devices, phones, tablets, etc. It connects to over 160 data sources, and it's got around 40 out-of-the-box data visualizations that you can use, some of them on the screen here. If you're a consumer of Power BI outputs, you might be less familiar with some of the back-end kind of capabilities. So it's got the ability to connect to data sources, bring data in, cleanse it, transform it, model it to present to end users. And then, of course, those data visualizations, 40 or so out the box, plus a community of custom-built visuals that you can connect into. And a particularly interesting one, this one launched in December 2023, it's their Q&A interface. So after ChatGPT, before Copilot, here's an interface, a visual that you can drop into your Power BI reports that allow your users to use natural language, in this case English, to query the data model. And its advantages over something like Copilot, because it's working with your data model, it's giving you things like autocomplete. So as you're writing the sentence, it will suggest dimensions or measures that you might be interested to look at in the context, and then it'll build your visual for you. So it's not the full Copilot chat experience, but it's a very focused and useful chat interface. If you forgive me a bit of nostalgia, I just want to have a look at where Power BI came from and then build up to where it's going. So when I was using those apartments over in Bristol some 20 odd years ago, the products we were working with at the time was something called ProClarity. So this was a third-party data visualization tool, and Microsoft went out and acquired that in 2005. Now, the diagrams, the visuals might be familiar. You can tell it's an older version of Windows that it's operating under. It was the tool of choice, or certainly one of the leading tools at that point, for the Microsoft SQL Server Analysis Services engine data model. So Microsoft SQL Server was their data platform, Analysis Services their OLAP model, and ProClarity pretty much the leading front-end tool for that engine at the time. Over the next 10 years or so, under Steve Ballmer, Microsoft's second CEO, Microsoft pursued this strategy of trying to use that intellectual property in a number of ways and add to it. So in 2011, they put Power View into SQL Server in their Denali release. In 2013, Power Pivot and Power Query were added into Excel. They're still there today. You may or may not be making use of those capabilities. Throughout this time, what we actually saw was Click and then Tableau really grow in their market share and kind of dominance of the front-end market. And it was in 2015, now under Satya Nadella's leadership, that Microsoft decided to launch a competing product, which ended up being Power BI Desktop. And we've seen now for 10 years just this continuous iteration, innovation, enhancement of the product, really following that kind of cloud model of continuous release. And it's taken it to a position where really Power BI is the leading tool in the market and has been for some 8 or 9 years from some of the analysis. Trevor shared earlier the Gartner hype cycle. This is another one of their analyses, their magic quadrants that you may be familiar with. This is the one from May 2025, earlier this year, for analytics and business intelligence platforms. And you can see Microsoft top right in that kind of leaders quadrant and in a good position away from the competitors. Tableau's still there as one of the strong players in the market, but that gap between Microsoft and Tableau does seem to have grown over the past few years. I've put AWS on here as well. They're in the challengers quadrant. I'm going to come back to talk a little bit about what AWS are doing in this market. But yeah, Microsoft have been top right for something like 9 years in a row, and it's just that gap between them and the competitors has grown over that time. So back to the case study. The customer has already got Power BI. It's a leading data visualization tool in the market, and yet they've got these kind of problems. So where was their actual challenge? Now, in some of our past events, those of you who are returning visitors to us, we've used our both ends to the middle framework to explain our approach here. So just to recap, when we're thinking about these kind of business solutions and problems, we're coming at it from the side of the business case, the use case we're looking to service, the personas, the people, the way they want to interact with data, and the data that's available to them, the analysis, the provision of that data, storage and modelling. And in the middle are a range of technology options. Now, for many years it's been relational databases and multidimensional databases, and in the past 5 or so years that's transitioned to data lakes, lake houses, and increasingly agentic systems, AI models, etc. The gap really was here in the middle for them because they had the user interfaces, the Power BI type interfaces, but they didn't have any kind of data repository underpinning that. And so our recommendation was to put in place a lakehouse. This is a pretty common and best practice pattern for lakehouses now across technologies. It's called the Medallion Architecture. The name comes from the bronze, silver, gold layers, if you're not familiar with that. So on the left, you start with the bronze layer. You bring a copy of your kind of operational transactional data in at the raw stage. You integrate that, cleanse it, bring it together in a silver layer, and then curate it and model it and present it for specific use cases through the gold layer. They also had some heating data coming in from the hotels, for example, other facilities type data, which was more of a real-time nature. So they wanted to have an ability to bring real-time data in. And they also wanted to be able to innovate and play around. And so we built a sandbox into the architecture for them. On the right-hand side, reporting, analysis, data science and AI, those are the kind of use cases that you can then start to service up from this platform. Some of the advantages of a medallion architecture, that single source of truth, that phrase has been around for the whole of my career. But this is the latest incarnation of how you might service that. Where it does differ from data warehousing of old is you can take not just that structured data in, but also semi and unstructured data. And Trevor talked about how generative AI might help you bring in some of those unstructured data sources and add them into the mix. It's got batch and real-time capabilities. I talked about the machine data, the kind of heating control data that they had access to. It's robust, flexible, scalable, performant, with that kind of cloud mentality of continuous development and innovation. These things are delivered through cloud platforms, so you can keep deploying regularly. And you've got to keep in mind also the kind of integration of security and governance for it. So they had Power BI on the right-hand side, serving that reporting analysis need, but they had a gap in the bit below it. So how might you serve that? Well, we naturally, for the investment they had in Power BI, they didn't want to move away from that entirely, but the evolution of Power BI now in the Microsoft world is towards Fabric, what they're calling their kind of end-to-end, all-in-one analytics platform. And it's got data engineering capabilities. It's got data science capabilities. It's got real-time capabilities. It's underpinned by Copilot, and Andrew showed one of the screenshots of Copilot in Fabric. You've got Copilot for developers to help with the coding. You've got Copilot for self-service users to help them build their analyses. And you've got the Copilot interface that Andrew shared, where when you're consuming your data through Power BI, you can also use it to help interrogate and surface insights. Underpinning it is the OneLake platform. So this is based on the open source Delta Parquet format. So a really good one for maintaining that optionality that Andrew and Trevor have referenced this morning. You can plug in other tools. If you don't want to use a Microsoft database or a Microsoft Lakehouse, you can hold the data in OneLake and then use something like Databricks on top of that. So great to have that as an open source file format for all your workloads. And then across the piece, you've got Microsoft Purview for the security and the governance piece. So where did Fabric come from? Well, when Satya Nadella, he joined Microsoft first in 1992, he really started to kind of make his name and catch the attention of the board with his work on the Azure cloud platform. So Windows Azure launched in 2010. Note the Windows there because it was very Microsoft-centric at that point in time. But under his leadership, he then took the top job at Microsoft. He became the third CEO in 2014, and it was rebranded and relaunched as Microsoft Azure, and they really opened up to things like Linux as an operating system and cooperation with many other technology vendors. We saw some of that in Trevor's, the Financial Times diagram, all the interplays between the vendors. Well, Satya Nadella kind of opened Microsoft up to some of that in 2014. They then brought to market a product called Synapse Analytics that some of you may have played with. That came out in December 2020, and it was building on their parallel data warehouse, high performing, high scalable database. It also had some Spark capabilities. So Databricks, I mentioned a moment ago, kind of pioneered that. This was Microsoft's first foray into the Spark world. And Synapse didn't really capture the market share they'd anticipated. And so I think in quite a clever move in 2013, they brought together that market-leading data visualization tool and what they were doing with the back end and the data platforming piece. And they bundled it all together into this all-in-one offering, which they've branded as Fabric. So that came out just about 2 years ago at this point, and we're seeing what we saw with Power BI, frequent releases, frequent new functionality being added into the system, So the appeal of Fabric, and we talked about this being kind of business-led data platforms as a title here. Well, the appeal to business teams will come from the low-code and the no-code tooling that's available within it. So you can create your own data factory pipelines and flows with point-and-click interfaces. There's lots of out-of-the-box connectors. You're not having to go and write lots of code to go and pull data in from source systems. You've also got, with the Visual Query Editor, a front-end interface to build SQL queries. So again, dragging and dropping columns and tables, and it'll write the SQL for you. At an enterprise level, it has got a variety of database options: relational, lakes, lake houses, warehousing. So you'll find a data storage option on top of that one lake platform. There's lots of different available models here. That means you'll be able to service lots of use cases in the way that you hold your data and how you model your data through semantic models, just like in the Power BI tool. And if you really want that kind of ultimate control and you like getting hands-on and writing the code, then it's got a notebook interface, which is really good for both data engineering and data science use cases and everything in between. So Spark SQL, PySpark, Spark R, they're all the languages you might want to use are supported in here. Now, in some areas, it's got some catching up to do with Databricks. Databricks has been in this market a bit longer and pioneered the use of Spark and the notebook interfaces. But we're using this at the moment, and it's very capable. So that's the end-to-end Fabric landscape. The promise for this hospitality company is it really ought to make it faster then for them to deliver new requirements. We can enable the users with tooling that lets them pull in new data sets rather than being dependent on the small central core data team to do that for them. They can build, with the help of Copilot, new front-end interfaces and visualizations and dashboards, etc. It should give them greater access to that data, the integration through Purview, the governance as well. All of this hopefully keeping people inside the system, surfacing the data through this system rather than forcing them to work outside the system in Excel. With the use again of kind of Copilot and the AI and the ML capabilities, they can start to build in more advanced forward-looking capabilities, and there's some bits of Power BI already there that they're not utilising, such as the Q&A interface for that. And then ultimately, trying to get all of their organisational data through this platform to make sure they've got that enhanced data coverage. A couple of other customers that are on a similar journey at the moment, also looking at Fabric very seriously. I'll start with this one, Surgical Optics Manufacturer. This is a Japanese company that we work with in our Singapore practice. Here it was the finance leader that came to us and really wanting to move faster than their IT team could support, saying to us, okay, we've got an existing Power BI estate, but we can't move quickly enough here. We need to be doing more with it and more with data more broadly, and IT is a bottleneck for me. So low code suits the finance users, but actually some of them are also in that kind of more advanced camp of being very open to looking at notebooks. So where they can customize and optimize for performance, they're open to learning and getting hands-on with some of that language. And one that I'm working with at the moment with Al here is an aerospace manufacturer. This is more of an IT-led initiative, actually. In this case, they've got ERP instances, SAP and others, in a variety of sites, a different instance in each site. And so bringing all that data together has always been a challenge for them. Here, there's an IT-led initiative to put a data lakehouse platform in place to serve the whole organisation. And they're using our metadata-driven ETL framework to expedite the build of that. And we are starting to see, this in some areas is less mature than other tools we've worked with in the past. And so things like some of the support around service principles for the scheduling of jobs, well, that's not there yet. Microsoft's roadmap has it coming next year in 2026. So we're working around some little bits, but it's doing a very good job so far. I said I'd come back to AWS, and I think the interesting thing is the kind of stark comparison here of the Fabric landscape diagram and how they position the product with the equivalent from Amazon. So where Microsoft have used Power BI and they're leveraging that brand and that traction to broaden out the use cases serving users, Amazon are doing that with SageMaker, their AI engine. So you've got SageMaker here in the SageMaker Studio for model development. You've also got Redshift, SQL Analytics, EMR, Glue, Athena, etc. for data processing. Over on the right-hand side, you can see they're going to bring in QuickSight for the BI capabilities. They're going to bring streaming and search to this platform as well, with governance, the Purview equivalent stuff across this, and all based on top of a Lakehouse platform. So I think interesting to see two different vendors taking a very similar approach, coming to the same conclusion really, that we want to enable users, and providing more interfaces and more capabilities for end users, for power users, is a great way to go here in enabling the business. Some quick kind of benefits, trade-offs of this end user platform approach. Certainly we see this with Microsoft, and I presume it's going to be coming following a similar path from Amazon. These things are bundled together, and so they're seen as kind of easier to buy, and certainly for the vendor easier to sell. The pricing structures are simpler, and therefore you just kind of subscribe and get going. The end user enablement is also a little bit easier because the interfaces are common. They get into the system and they've not just got the data visualization, but they've also got the data engineering, the data science, etc., all within one coherent user experience. In terms of being easier to run and being a bit less dependent on IT, well, there are fewer configuration options. The integration with things like networking is a bit simpler, and so you should be able to get up and running as a business team with less need for IT support. And because they're cloud hosted and evolving very quickly, you're just seeing the features get added time and again. On the other hand, though, you might find that the granularity of the pricing isn't enough. You know, in Microsoft's case, we saw you had to choose what tier you wanted based on the kind of storage needs, etc. And if you went up to the next tier, you're literally doubling the price. So moving from one tier to the next can be an expensive thing, and you don't want to pay for more than you need. And because you've got a simpler interface, you've got less control, fewer configuration options. You've just got to live with what you're given in that regard. And it's less mature than some other established products in the market. So something like Databricks or Snowflake, specialists in this kind of lakehouse space, they're a couple of years or so ahead of these tools. And so things like the notebook interface or their Spark implementation might not be as optimized yet within Fabric. And to that point of kind of optionality, well, once you're in, there is an element and a risk of lock-in here. You're serving so many use cases from one interface, your users might find that transitioning to something else down the line is a bit harder. So, in summary, these kind of platforms are closing that gap between IT delivered and user delivered solutions. The democratization we saw over the last 10 years of data insights, data analysis that were delivered by tools like Power BI, really now being brought to data engineering, data science workloads. And if you need some help, then we'd be delighted. I talked about this morning, we're already helping with implementations of these things. So if you want to build a lakehouse, if you don't have that already, then something like our metadata-driven ingestion framework is a really good accelerator for that. Putting in place best practice patterns and governance from the start to make sure your users are working in a consistent way can be really useful. Enabling your users with some training and education about what's possible, also really good. I talked about the kind of acceleration options that we can bring, and then preserving optionality is a consideration here. Are you using the tools for the right cases, and are you thinking about, well, I don't want to be completely locked into just Microsoft here. What might options be down the line to switch out again if I need to do that?